Hello, everyone. I'm Claudia Glover, a senior reporter for Tech Monitor, and it's my pleasure to be chairing an exclusive webinar discussion in partnership with Fortinet entitled Modernizing and Securing the Grid, Building Cyber Resilience in the Power and Utilities Industry. State-sponsored threat actors, financially motivated cybercriminals, and amateur hackers will continue to be enticed by the massive impact that can result from an attack on a nation's critical infrastructure. The risk of a successful attack could be severe. Damage to power grids could leave cities in the dark or even put lives at risk. A recent study shows that attacks against energy utilities are among the top 3 most targeted sectors for cyber attacks in the United States. In addition, Europe, Australia, and Japan have reported an increase in threats against critical infrastructure. The threat is global and the risk alarming. The webinar will be exploring the strategies security leaders can adopt to thwart these malicious attacks, as well as the suite of integrated and automated technologies available to them. I am therefore delighted to be joined by 2 excellent speakers. They are Augustin Valencia, Operational Technology Business Development Manager at Fortinet, and Swan Westphal, CEO of the Institute of Security and Safety. Thank you both for agreeing to take part. We would also like you, our audience at home, to get involved. Please submit your questions for our speakers at any point during the session via the Ask a Question button on your screen. Right, let's get started. What are the main cybersecurity challenges facing the power and utilities sector right now? What is the current landscape? Swan, if you'd like to kick us off.
Well, thanks, first of all, for inviting me. When we talk about the threat landscape and the challenges, I would like to start out because I was very inspired by a recent presentation of Brett Johnson with thinking and about and the need to understand the motivation behind attacks. So if we think about this, what is the motivation? So for some, it's money, for some, it's status, and for some, it's ideology. When we're speaking about the energy grid and utilities, we have various phases of threats which we have to face. So the first of all is like the same as for everyone when it comes to money as motivation: ransomware attacks. There are ransomware cartels out there. It's a business model. It's grown, and it's a threat for everyone, really everyone around the world. But more specifically, when we come, which is even more dangerous for our power grids, is threats diverged by ideology. So there we face nation-state actors, and any threat which is motivated by ideology is much more persistent. So we're talking about advanced persistent threats. And I think the war in Ukraine was a game changer when it came to that. So this motivated a lot of people to throw attacks at us, which haven't been there before. So it's not just ransomware attacks, it's wipers we are facing. And above all this, we have a growing attack surface. So what was once one utility, which we had to secure, we now have a lot of small and medium-sized utilities, and even smart meters within homes, which are easily accessible. And everything is interconnected. So we have a growing threat landscape on the one hand, and very motivated attackers on the other hand. So if we're talking about the threat landscape, I think this is a very big question.
Absolutely. Augustin, anything to add?
We have to think both on the attacker, but also on the power and utilities. No, the ecosystem is changing in a so fast way in these moments. It's not just that we are speaking about digitalization; it's an absolute digital transformation because we are doing new things in a totally different way. So in the past, transport of energy, distribution of energy, power generation, everything was one way, okay, to the customer. Now we are so aware, for example, of the climate impact. We are putting a lot of focus on renewables. How renewables are going to address the demand is making that flows are changing in different directions. So it is making a great challenge for the utilities that have been traditionally growing in a very consistent layered with establishing different layers of defense. Now we have to think of everything at all parts at the same time. And it's a great challenge at all levels, because we are speaking of the technology, every business, and the whole corporation, how is it going to be able to face all this together, to understand the part of risk that every part is contributing.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, when we speak about these sorts of risk, I mean, what sort of strategies are security leaders adopting to effectively combat these sorts of attacks and these widening attack vectors? You know, what are there any innovative technologies available to them? Swan, if you'd like to chime in.
Yes and no. I'd say there are very good best practices which have been written down in standards, and I think the most leaders who really try to protect us now make very good sense of using those established standards. Let's say the NIST framework. If we tailor around that, if we look at that, the way how you use them, they can be innovative. So if we have a look at it, let's say just as an example, you got the NIST frameworks such as identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. We all know that framework. But the way how you can play it out, let's say in the way of prevention, so identification and protection, we can find different means of doing this. The technologies for prevention are new ones, for example, where we had only face-to-face trainings beforehand. We can now deal with cyber ranges, run blue team, red team exercises, and simulate digital twins in order to really provide good training for the people who are actually in the role of defending and the actual blue team. Just one example, but we could also think about social media monitoring. There are companies out there who have massive data lakes in order to find threats and threats evolving and somebody communicating about them way before they actually hit the target. So if we have good social media monitoring and also dark web threat intelligence monitoring, we might be able to prevent some of the attacks. Also within the detection side, right? I think if you monitor the landscape of people who offer SOC services and SIEM services, this has risen a lot. And there's still room for improvement, I'd say, when it comes to AI technologies within the cybersecurity sector. I think we can still improve a lot in order so we don't have that many false positives in the beginning if we install these softwares. But even there, I think the strategies behind it, they still stay the same, which also is due to some certification schemes. But the way we play out everything behind the strategies, we have to think of new creative ways to do it in order to get better.
I mean, that's the lovely thing about kind of having such a fast-moving tech landscape, isn't it? That you can be increasingly more creative because the new tools you're getting and facilitating that sort of exponentially. But I mean, within this sort of government landscape, with additions of things like IoT and OT sensors, how is that landscape sort of changing? Like, you mentioned digital twins, I guess. Does it go towards sort of the transparency of the landscape, I guess?
I think it doesn't really have to do. I think we've seen the need of something to be done about this. And, you know, I have several hats and I play several roles in my free time. So I'm head of the Task Force for European Initiatives at the EEISAC and also at other working circles. So in there, I would say we're doing our best, and also the regulators are doing their best to adapt to the landscapes. The attacks we've seen, that started when the Stuxnet case happened, which actually has shown us for the very, very first time that attacks on OT systems are possible and doable, and they do it. So, and from there, we've learned, right? We've seen that was the first shock moment. Okay, they actually target our OT infrastructure. And by now, if you say IoT and IIoT and OT sensors, I think governments and regulatory bodies have understood that there is a need to get some frameworks around this. And this is why at the moment, everyone, I mean, we're discussing the NIS2 directive, we're discussing the network code, the Cyber Resilience Act, then there's the AI Data Act, there's the DORA. So we are really doing a lot at the moment. And I think it's an interesting interplay between the industry facing the challenges, and somehow some of them even calling for regulation because then they get the means and the money and budget to do it. But also communities building up in order to find best practices of some challenges to tackle which we haven't had before.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when you mention these attacks, I mean, I was going to ask Augustine, we've got these sort of attacks affecting the grid and affecting the cloud and also sort of decentralized energy resources. I mean, who is experiencing the most risk, do you think?
Well, let me recap some things with what Swanti was telling, because it was so interesting. For example, we were speaking about a NIS2 or Cyber Resilience Act, that is sensors, IoT. So there is a fact. In the past, any pilot considering adding sensors to critical infrastructure, the only vector was reducing cost. So that goes against directly of thinking of adding any layer of security. Okay. Maybe one risk with Cyber Resilience Act is to ask for all capabilities to any kind of devices and go to the opposite extreme. So maybe the power utilities are so specific that may need a sectorial approach, knowing the impact of every different sensor or actuator or protection, how to address the proper technical controls, and how to adapt, sometimes in the device or sometimes considering a system. This is part of this zone in a substation or in a photovoltaic plant or a wind farm. Okay, it's going to be very different, or a electrical vehicle charger. Okay, so the place in the ecosystem is important. The function is important, and rule any to any maybe could increase cost and even to adopt security layers more slowly than if we try to prioritize in these different ways. Sometimes it's not easy to put everything in a smart meter, but maybe we can think of a proper, let's say, minimum area where other technical controls with other technologies can apply to, let's say, a neighborhood, considering what could be the highest impact of that minimum area, instead of putting everything in every device. No? Just a thought of how to and how to consider the specifically approaches that energy needs. Okay, but at the same time, yes, we traditionally speak of about the Purdue model, no, the pyramid of automation. Energy may follow it somehow. The hierarchy is followed very tightly. So how now are we adopting the cloud? How are we adopting new sensors in these traditional models? Is what I was referring in the previous question, because in the past I was just thinking of, I have to isolate my system. I'm only sending some data that I need, and just it. No, now I will demanding the electrical vehicle point chargers to charge, but also to be controlled for others to find the best hours to charge cars, depending on the generation. Also, according to that, the substations will need all this live data to address how to prioritize, in some cases, the households instead of the vehicle chargers, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And all this needs a cloud environment, for example, that needs all data from the smart meters for smart thermostats, or all this, to be able to address this in real time with demand and the generation. So, for example, this is in many cases called the virtual power plant. How am I able to optimize the air conditioning consumption at every household? Just moving 1 or 2 degrees at houses. That can meet a lot of energy decreasing demand. But how all these devices at households are connected is through cloud. And through cloud will need to connect somehow to critical infrastructures as energy dispatches. This traditionally was forbidden. No, the energy dispatch has to be isolated only against the state market. No, we are changing everything. So, is the cloud a risk? Not necessarily, if we are addressing cybersecurity from the design.
But cloud can lead to other risks in sort of third-party risks or digital supply chain risks. If you have everything that's public facing or internet facing, you open yourself up to that sort of risk.
That is exactly the point, right?
Yeah.
So we are relying on much more players right now, with all we have in mind, which is to come, that smart new world we're looking at, and all the different players. We have to rely on security by design, as Augustine said, right? We really have to find ways of securing our supply chain to make sure that everyone who's involved does their best in order to, and also understands their role in the whole chain of where they play their role and might be a security risk, which might bring down the power grid. And a lot of people I talk to, they didn't even understand their role. And to be honest, it's also very, very complicated to understand, because the way we program things at the moment, I always like to talk about the Matryoshka approach. You know, these Russian little dolls, right?
Sure.
But that's how software is built. And we rely mainly, if anything which is smart, we rely on software. And software is built by using libraries, by using code samples, which are taken from some GitHub. And then in that is another library, and in that is another library. And it's really, really getting hard to understand. So that's just the software part. And for the hardware parts, again, we rely on things which always have worked. And I think if you think about current examples like the Log4j, I think many of us suffered from it, right? And everyone used that and put it in, and we just had to figure out where exactly it was in our code, because it's so deep in some layers, and nobody ever thought about that this might be the reason for a cyber attack or the way in, right? And this is why supply chain is getting more and more important, and transparency is getting more important, and also trust and trusted relationships between every stakeholder. And from the past, everything in the energy sector, we all kind of know each other, right? It's a very small community of cybersecurity experts, and it was also okay because we had these systems, and we had a lot of manual systems. We had our OT air gaps, and we could run by this for a very long time. But now, as Augustine said, we have to open up a lot. And we get a lot of new parties and vendors and suppliers in there, which didn't necessarily work with critical infrastructures before. And to establish that trusted mindset, also to get an information exchange. If you've been hacked, please tell us, because it might have a very serious impact for us. We've seen it. right now with some suppliers. So I think we definitely need to have that trusted relationship between the close third-party vendors in order to make sure that we work together in terms of cyber attacks and how to deal with it.
Yeah, and you have that worry around reputation as well, which is something across the cybersecurity sort of landscape. We have to get rid of that worry of reputation and shame, for want of a better word, and just pool all of our knowledge, right? Because that's where we'll get these solutions from. But I mean, when you talk about risks, I mean, one of the big ones that's kind of glaring us in the face with critical national infrastructure is legacy systems, right? That's something that we have a lot of legacy systems in critical national infrastructure. We can't necessarily turn them off without causing a huge, inconvenience to the people, to the citizens who are using them. I mean, Augustine, what would you say would be the best ways to tackle those sorts of legacy system risks?
Well, legacy system is an inherent part of the system. Nobody can think that we will ever remove legacy system, because even when we start removing, in 10 years time, we will be having another 10 years old systems, because the ecosystem is huge. Okay. So, and moreover, we have legacy systems that do their function right. You cannot remove just it because it's old, because it's going right. Maybe the substations can be 25, 14 years old and working right. We are performing controls, sensoric, protections. We are adding that part, okay? But the core is not going to be changed, maybe ever. We don't have to think that this is something that is going to drop in some moment. What we have to know is, okay, this is part of the equation, and we have to find the proper ways to address the different risks. The question is that the original risk analysis need to be maybe done from scratch, because the situation is changing a lot. A coal power plant that maybe is working for more than 25 years, or a nuclear power plant that now it's going to have life extension. The new systems are not the original systems. Nuclear maybe has a really consistent procedure to elaborate any analysis with any new piece that is adding. But we are speaking about how are we going to change the whole system, putting, for example, 80% of solar and wind production now. So we are, even the analysis for wind farms, when they meant for the system only 5% of total energy, is different than when they are now becoming the 25. And that's something that we have also to take into account. So maybe some analysis in the past of how do we have to make segmentation, or what traditionally was local maintenance and now needs to be remote maintenance, because technicians now are not able to go wind farm by wind farm because the number has exploded. Changes the whole, and we have to think as a whole, okay, from design, operation, and maintenance, and all this with the new dimensions that are not just the system, the component, or the communication, as Swan was saying. Now we have libraries, we have APIs, work with different workloads in the cloud. What is important is to be able to not forget anything, to be able to draw everything together, to understand the proper interdependencies, and also how dependencies and risk depend on the way of each part, as every part is growing at different rhythm.
Yeah, and on the legacy systems, with the OT, we won't get rid of it, but to just quote a CISO friend of mine, who just once said they had a ransomware attack and had to rebuild everything, then you can get rid of legacy systems, and he called it digital detox. Just a short story on the side. which is, I think, the most painful experience to get rid of legacy systems.
Yeah, but please, for example, we say no, traditional industrial protocols have not a security by design. It is true. But at the same time, we are developing a lot of technology to understand every control inside of these protocols and be able to link this with from which origins, which devices, which people to say you can and you can't, for example. Or there are, in some cases, we have to differentiate maybe in the day-to-day protocols that make the system run versus the protocols that are used, for example, for maintenance. Maybe we can change the protocols for maintenance. What about traditional telnet, SMP 1 or 2, or SMB 1? So if I speak about SMB that nobody understands, but I tell that this calls NotPetya or WannaCry, maybe people understand. If I speak about SMP 1 or 2, these are the typical protocols, for example, that SolarWinds employed to manage a whole ecosystems of devices. Okay, if we put newer protocols for management that make enforce the trust or the zero trust philosophy, the attackers are going to have it much more difficult to exploit the legacy systems.
Absolutely.
I mean, with those sorts of zero trust, I mean, as you said, Swan, like, moving forward with this sort of thing, sometimes a digital detox is just a sort of the quickest way of kind of getting rid of all of this. It's such a long time.
Not the best one, though. Not the best one.
Obviously the most brutal one. But my point is, it takes a long time to sort of optimize all of this and get it to a point. And as you said, Augustine, once you've done that, you still have 10 years old legacy systems that you began with to start with anyway. I mean, to me, it seems as though you need a sort of, the skills that people need are sort of growing exponentially with the tools, and the tools are sort of ahead of the skills. I mean, what are the key elements, do you think, of shrinking this sort of, the skills gap that we're kind of constantly grappling with as technology grows so quickly, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to people, and I mean, we're a training and education institute, and we're doing a lot of consulting as well. So we talk to people, and we face the challenge every now and then with our customers that they put out jobs there, and they need these positions to be filled, but they just can't find people. And if you look at the statistics of IC Square and stuff like that, you can see that the cybersecurity skills force is way too small of what we actually need of people. So the question is, how can we shrink that skills gap? I mean, obviously, training and education of people who are already there and who already know the industry, the utilities, who have already all the mindset and the skills around it and just lack the cybersecurity skills. That is a way to think about it. If you talk about digitalization schemes anyways, and most companies do, they have some kind of digitalization schemes, why not put the cybersecurity part within that digitalization scheme and get people a new perspective, right? People thinking about, okay, now I am an expert, an engineer, an expert in all this, and maybe this gets automatized by some tools. Why not make them still expert in their field, but securing their former technologies and using their engineering expertise also to think of fallback solutions, engineering fallback solutions, which hackers would never think of, and to get out these fantastic skills which are already there, train the rest, because most people who are interested in the topic, if they get the first spark of attention of cybersecurity, most people actually love working in the field because they feel that it's really important what they are doing. So if you can inspire them to go that way and to follow that road, you might either find workflows within your organization anyways.
Mhm.
Or if you look around, just find the people with the right soft skill set. If I look at job positions out there and I see, I want somebody to have 10 years experience in X, Y, Z. And I think, that technology hasn't even been there for 10 years. Why would you expect someone to have worked with that for 10 years? So really thinking, maybe also training headhunters a little more of what is actually needed in the field. Because in many job positions, it's really important that people have the right soft skill set, and the rest you can train. And with that, also, and this is a big plaidoyer to everyone in the community, pay respect to these job roles. I think the Bridewell report just showed, it's a small study just within the UK, but it showed that people working in cybersecurity and critical national infrastructure are suffering heavily from burnout and stress symptoms, because it's a lot of pressure on those jobs. You want to do everything right, otherwise you'll cause great damage, right? And on the same time, you hardly ever get respect, because, to be honest, everyone like us, we're the inconvenient people. We always are. We make things more complicated, somehow more slow, and projects need to be delayed because we need to do our risk analysis. Yes, we are the inconvenient guys. But to leverage that by showing respect that this is really worth it and this is really necessary, I think this is something where we all can improve a lot.
Certainly. It's interesting what you say about sort of soft skills, because with software developers, when they're going into all of these open code libraries and they're creating all of this excellent infrastructure online, if they were trained to bake cybersecurity in at that point as well, that would be a good starting point too, right? That's
absolutely. But for this, there has to be a value attached to taking that extra time in development, and not, just quickly push out everything, but taking that extra time needed. And this needs to be understood by the management layer, by the top management, that project development will take longer if you do it securely by design. And then it's back to the OEMs to say, I want it that way. And if you can't show me, I won't buy it from you anymore.
But the skills gap is a hot topic. And I think that for power and utilities can have an extra layer of difficulty, because I always said, when you are in industrial cybersecurity, you need to have a knowledge of cybersecurity and a knowledge of industry. And sometimes it's like 2 degrees in one. And as Swan was telling, somebody expect that you were born with 10 years of experience of both. So sometimes maybe the best cybersecurity guys can mean a disruption in the system if they are not understanding the impact of the system they are working on. Okay, so maybe for power utilities, as Swan was telling, one of the key things is how to incorporate proper people to the business, and at the same time, how to train skilled people that are actually working in the system. I know a lot of, I always thought to myself when I was working in nuclear, people that are supposed to be old and they have a huge, massive knowledge of the systems. And when they become aware of the different new risks, but how they impact in their systems they know so well, they start to understand and make more questions, learning how to protect them. If we are able to make that match, not assume that the old system work alone and we don't need that expertise. If we understand the value of that expertise with the new technology expertise and put together to make multidisciplinary teams, we are going to be really successful. If we expect that anyone comes from the university knowing of everything, we are wrong. But at the same time, it is true that the technology itself, it's a barrier, because we have so many technologies for protection, for detection, for recover, respond, EDRs, firewalls, communications, identity, databases, everything. So it's very difficult to be specialized on everything. I would like to say that, for example, how Fortinet is now pushing to the universities the security academy, the Fortinet Security Academy. We are giving free programs that the university are free to adapt to their degrees and see how to give more practical approaches with real devices. And as Swan was telling, when people are touching them, they like them. If it's only theory, it's more difficult. No?
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's really imperative that we make people understand each other. And I think most of us have experienced that problem between IT and OT people. Hands up who hasn't. I love both of them. They're fantastic, just don't know how to talk to each other. Which comes from a very basic assumption that if you look at the CIA triad, for IT security people, it's confidentiality, integrity, availability. And for OT people, it's just the other way around. Availability is above all else. Everything else is, yeah, we can think about integrity. Integrity is important as well, but availability, it is the topmost important thing. So if we can handle that communication between silos within organizations and helping each other out and making most use of each other's expertise, a lot of help can be found within an organization where we don't need to hire new people to come in, but we can make use of the skills which are already within the organization. If we can find that meaningful conversation between the silos and making them understand each other, which is an initial step to be done, definitely. But also taking these people in many initiatives to go out and put the spark to as many young people as we can. So you start in universities, we're attached to the University of Applied Sciences in Mannheim, so we do that as well, but we also developed a game which is called Cyber for Schools, a red team, blue team game for schools to get people interested in even studying that part, right? So just thinking about that, this could be an interesting topic. So wherever we go, we need to be a little bit evangelist about our topic. I think I might have been called cybersecurity Jedi at one point because I think it's really, really important that we talk to people about it and that we get away from that old security posture. Before that, the security guys, you think of James Bond and all the guys who work in the shadows, like with their, with their uniforms and in the back and in the shadows, not to be seen. And I think these times have changed. We need to get them out in the light, although sometimes they still like to sit in the basement. And we need to drag them to the light and show their expertise, show that they are doing a great job there and that it's really valuable what they're providing for everyone else in the company and make them part of the team. And once we get there, I think the skills problem will slowly get different. But one difficult thing to add is also if you work in critical infrastructures, which are mostly state-owned, you also have the trouble of not being able to pay the same amount of money as other institutions can. So we will always, we have the plus in saying, look, what you do here with us is really, really important because let's face it, otherwise it's blackout. So the purpose thing is going pretty well. But a lot of critical infrastructures I know are really, really fighting with competition when it comes to payment.
Absolutely. And I mean, what you were saying before as well about kind of bringing the security guys out of the shadows and kind of showcasing their work and showcasing why it's interesting. I mean, that's not the first time I've heard that. A lot of people talk about that in terms of the CISO and the CIO, and they're sort of seen as these great translators, right? They are the interface. between business strategy and cybersecurity strategy. They explain to them why it's important, why it's interesting, and that's sort of this role is sort of resting into that place quite happily. And I mean, what should sort of a CISO and a CIO sort of what should they hit in order to ensure a buy-in from the board to take cybersecurity seriously? What do you think, Augustin?
Well, the good news is that things now are changing.
Yeah.
For example, last report from Gartner in 2023, they were telling that I think it was 27% of organizations now are understanding cybersecurity as a business risk, not just a technology risk.
Yeah.
When the board understands that this is a business risk, sometimes we can influence, how, as Swan was telling, at medium levels is critical that people influence the others to go to the light, to the brighter side of the company. But if these medium level managers are not supported by the direction, by the board, it's going to end because people in the end got tired. Now, if the push comes from the board and we build a culture, it's going to be successful one way or the other, but it's going to be successful. So as a CISO, one is understanding the risk, addressing the risk language, not the technology savvy language. Okay. As successful as we are to adapt or to understand the business processes and the risk and to match them with the technology risks, the more successful we will be accessing to the board. And at the same time, now, for example, Swan was telling in the beginning, we have a lever with the compliance. NIS2 is pointing at the board directly. It's not just the CISO's fault. We have to understand, we need to understand that if we have a great breach or we have a great disruption because of the geopolitical mess that we are having or whatever, it's not going to be the CISO's fault. It's everybody's fault because we haven't been able to address all the risks at all levels and making everybody address their own responsibility to make everybody accountable on their part. And this is always, we usually tell, but in critical infrastructure is critical. We are speaking always of process, people, and technology. For my part now, work on technology, I think that we are on a way also in making the technology more mature, making things easier to the people to adapt. Even the silos is because you operate this tool, you this other tool, and they don't speak. They don't speak each other. Now, even Gartner is speaking about cybersecurity mesh architecture, no? How every tool is speaking. So, but it's not just the tool. It's the tool, the team, understand the procedures, how are they going to interact to protect, to detect, but also to respond and recover, okay? If we are able to do all together, we are complying with NIS2. Even NIS2 is telling now the board that in case of a critical impact incident, you have to be able to notify in 24 hours time frame. That's impossible for a huge company as every utility is, if all this is not working together, if we are not going to work together, as Swan was telling, breaking the silos. Okay, so this is all we are speaking about. People, we are speaking about technology, we are speaking about compliance, but also at the role of the CISO. Hey, how are we going to develop the proper KPIs and KRIs? I see many times confusion between them. Hey, my risk does not be much regarding how my projects or initiatives are advancing. If we are putting a lot of firewalls with no rules, the effectivity or the efficiency of that initiative is zero. Okay, so for my case, if I'm selling you a firewall, I want you to use the full capabilities. because I want you to be protected to full extent. And not only the firewall, the CM, the EDRs, the identity operation management systems, everything has to be working together. These are complex systems. The people need to be working, maybe sometimes in the businesses, with that part of cybersecurity and the part of process automation and protections. So, and we will be speaking also with the process automation vendors. Typically here we speak about ABB, Siemens, General Electric, all these. Not anymore we can say this is for me and this is for you. We have to work as a team.
As a team, and also, as you mentioned before, with the regulators, you've got to make sure you're compliant. You've got to, because with all of these huge plethora of different things you're bringing in, that is a third-party risk. And therefore, that is where NIS2 comes in to really shape what you're doing and ensure that what you're doing is safe. Right, Swan?
Yeah, I want to put something out there. It's pretty straightforward. I would say you can be compliant without being cyber secure. But most of the time, if you're truly cyber secure, you'll be compliant automatically. So, right? So for me, it's the whole compliance topic is one which is always in the in-between sector. On the one hand, I think regulatory bodies are on the right track, right? It's necessary and needed that we have a framework there where everyone can find orientation and also is a little bit forced to move forwards because being honest, looking at most business, everything else is more important. At least this is what they're telling me until they get hacked and then suddenly nothing is as important. But the idea is, so with the NIS2 directive, this is definitely going to play a major role in the landscape. We'll definitely, and just I think alone in Germany, I think 40,000 new companies will fall under that NIS directive and being claimed critical infrastructures, which haven't been critical infrastructures before. So it's going to have a massive impact. And thinking about that word in between, right? What is needed? If you think about how do regulatory bodies actually create their regulations, it's usually the way that there has been a standard before, and then that standard is taken into account into the regulation, and very seldomly the other way around. So there are actually a lot of good people out there who have put their minds together to propose some good IEC standard or ISO standard or whatnot. In our case, 27,000 series, the 62443, everything out there, right? And then it's an in-between interplay. Will the standard suffice to be in accordance with the new law? How do now in the terms of NIS2 directive, we'll see how every nation state will play it out. So this is going to be very interesting. And then we have to find ways on how to understand best practices in order to be compliant, and also to be actually cyber secure, right? And this brings me back to my first point. We actually want everyone to be cyber secure. This is the most important part. And compliance should be a tool to help you on your way. This is how I see it, and I hope most of you would agree. But it is a very powerful tool as well, especially if we come back to the last question of talking to the board and CEO handling. Compliance can be a very, very powerful tool. If you say, look, we need to be compliant, otherwise it's your hat on the counter here. It's not mine, it's yours. You're the one responsible now. And I think NIS2 gives us very much push forward on this. But it's a lot about stakeholder management. And this is where I don't envy CISOs. Sorry for all of you out there. But you have to speak so many languages. You have to speak the language of the CEO who needs everything in a nutshell and very precise and just show me the risks and be quick about it. and you have to translate everything which comes from the top in a very technical manner to all your techie stuff. So it's a very in-between thing. And now we get new layers of just every time you did your SLA again, and you did your risk assessment again, and you've been compliant and did your audits, and now comes new regulation around. And we've seen that, I think, most critical infrastructures, at least in Germany, they put their hands together over their heads because we've had so much of this in a very short circle now. We just had the IT-Sicherheitsgesetz 2.0. Now it's the next one. So it's a constant change, but it's good because on the one hand, I think everyone should be able to say we want to be cyber secure, so we wouldn't actually need regulations. But as long as the landscape looks as it looks at the moment, I think regulations really help everyone getting along and pushing everyone in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I think that's actually a really nice place to stop. That's all we have time for today. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Augustin and Swan for their participation today. And I really enjoyed sharing this webinar. Excuse me. Thank you also to our audience at home for tuning in. If you'd like to submit additional questions to our speakers or understand more about the strategies security leaders are adopting to tackle cyber threats in the utilities industry, please email utilities@fortinet.com and a member of the Fortinet team will get back to you. We'll also be contacting you later this week to receive your feedback on today's webinar and share some additional pieces of thought leadership you may find interesting. Lastly, you can watch back today's webinar at your leisure by logging into the event platform and clicking On Demand tab on the event homepage. That's it from me. Thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you very much for having us. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn and anywhere. Looking forward to talking to all of you.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.